So I thought I'd talk about society for a little bit here. I think I'm going to not try too hard in this video. I don't mean that I am going to waste your time. I hope that's not the case. But what I'm getting at is that I think we all put ourselves under a good deal of pressure to behave a certain way, to function at a certain level, or to express some characteristic that people find worthy or meaningful or valuable. And I think that this pursuit is in itself somewhat unhealthy if it is not in the company of an understanding of how to be still and how to not place value on these things in the sense of by creating value in achievement, for example, or in being seen as a valuable person in society, by putting value in those spaces, or in intellectual spaces even, you create a drive in that direction. And because you have a drive that takes you in that direction based on the value you've put in those things, it can override just the value of being that is the most important thing to be in touch with. And so you see this theme a lot in society, especially right now, where people have their phones and their gadgets, and especially the phones, of course. And with the phones, they no longer have an obligation to sit and be still and not be stimulated mentally at any time, because the phone is always right there. You just pull it out and now you're not bored anymore. But what you're dealing with instead is a very low grade level of stimulation, interest, or something to dispel your boredom. But in a very real way, it's still boredom, because what it is it's not connected to something that is profound. Whereas stillness is profound. And the reason for that is that because when you are truly still, all that's really there to be with, in a sense, is everything, is the whole of existence, and is yourself, and is a relationship with emptiness. Because emptiness will always be there. Things will only be there for a time. Right? So it's good to develop a relationship to emptiness. And if we have these values we've placed on things, where we say that this is a valuable thing worth achieving and worth striving for, then it creates this polarity within us which says that to not do that is unworthy. To not achieve is unworthy. To not strive is unworthy. And so if you don't address that belief that it's not worthy if you don't strive, and if you don't achieve, and if you don't attain things like love or friendship or a certain career, then what can happen is, in the ways that you do achieve, you can place such a value on achieving and on achievement that you don't stop to realize that you've put all of your energy in this space. And so it's driving you and driving you and driving you, but there's a gap, there's a hole in you somewhere where something's missing. And some people fill these spaces with relationships. It's not about achievement, it's just about relationship. And that might feel a lot more positive, but it is still the same quality of ephemeral. It's still the same quality of being a passing, a wisp. It's not as real as you are, because you are in every part of your own thoughts and life, and in every part of the illusion, in every part of the dream, in the sense that your mind is powerful enough to decide what reality is on a lot of levels. You see people do this all the time. They think reality is all sorts of things. And they're not necessarily connecting the pieces to what they truly know. And this is why I'll say that one of the greatest achievements of the mind is to simply know what you know. And what's so profound about that, and what's so brilliant about that, I'm not saying I'm brilliant, but what's so brilliant about that idea for anybody who would like to apply it to themselves is in the understanding that it's attainable to everyone. Everyone can stop and know what they know. Now, a lot of people will dispute this to varying degrees. Sometimes the more scientific and philosophic people will dispute it, or sometimes it's the less scientific and philosophical people. But the primary statement that you can make of knowledge is simply, and really quickly, it's something that a lot of philosophers will disagree with, but I guarantee that they're wrong. And so this will, create a platform from which to build knowledge if you understand this idea, which is just to say, I exist. And now, Descartes had that famous statement, I think, therefore I am, which was a response to this idea of people asking, do we exist? However, it's a lot simpler than all of that. Because as long as you break down existence and non-existence into two camps, then you know that they are opposite things. They are opposite natures. Anything that expresses quality other than to not exist is existence, because it has some kind of a quality. That it means it's a thing. Non-existence is for things that aren't things. It's kind of paradoxical. You can't even really talk about it as a thing or having anything to do with things, because things are existential ideas. They're things that have qualities, properties, they exist. And if a person is to say, do I exist or don't I exist? Well, then they're sitting there arguing with the idea of whether anything exists at all. But we've named these things. They're thoughts that are interfacing with colors and shapes, auditory sensations, touch sensations. None of this stuff sounds like non-existence. None of this stuff sounds like it doesn't have any quality whatsoever. And so when people say, I don't know if I exist, they're really arguing about the definition of what existence is. On some level, they understand that they exist because they're the one having that experience and having that question. You can't have a question if you don't exist. That doesn't make any sense. How would something that doesn't exist question its own existence? A computer, in a sense, can do that. But it doesn't have a relationship to the question that it's asking. If it puts out a line of code that says, do I exist? Somebody comes along and reads that and goes, oh, the computer's wondering if it exists. The computer doesn't have any experience of sitting there and going, do I exist? But you do as a person, and you know you do because you know how it feels. You know how that experience reaches you as a reality. And so once you come to that place of being able to say, yes, all I need to exist is to just be having an experience. Experience is existence. There is no experience without existence. Those two things have to be the same. It doesn't make any sense if they aren't. at the very minimum, right? Then that lets you start to make a lot more concrete statements about the world. So I think that coming from that place, coming from that understanding, when you know that being able to say, I know what? I know that I'm having an experience, and that is an incontrovertible fact, you're having some experience at all times, then you can build other observations. You can say, right now, I'm experiencing myself. Well, let me think about this. I want this to be precise, right? Because I could say I'm experiencing myself having a body, but does self have a body? I mean, the body's gonna die. I don't really own it in a sense. But what I can say is I'm experiencing the experience of a body, of perceiving from what seems to be through the apparatus of the body, through the eyes, the ears, the skin, the dimensions of this body. It's my present experience. Now, what I could also say is that I'm experiencing things on other levels. And so it's not just this, and I'm not really aware of those levels. And that's a profound question. That's a question of what is the totality of our existence? And what do we really know? And there's a lot of evidence that we know more than we know we know. But then you can say is that what I know is that I have these questions. I wonder, I don't know. But I do feel physical sensations through the apparatus of a physical body. And I have memories of things. And I can create ideas of scenarios and structures in my mind. I can imagine spaces and shapes and colors. I can imagine interacting with these colors and shapes. And then I can go through the world and I can have an experience that corresponds to the thing that I imagine. I can have a somewhat magical relationship to the world of all possibility, because in my mind I can dip in and out of it wherever my mind can take me. And then in the world I can find places that also exist in my imagination, that I can also find in my imagination or in my dreams when I sleep. And so I know these things are all related. And starting here and knowing these things, it lets us make other statements. We can say next, we can go, well, okay, so here I am with this apparatus that is a body. I'm exploring a space that appears to be outside of the body. That you can know is that it appears that way. And that lets you make predictions that it will probably continue to appear that way. It'll probably continue to appear to be outside of your body, but when you're dreaming, are those spaces outside of your body? Or are they in it? It seems the same to your mind. And so there's always the possibility that somebody's hijacked your brain. They've brainwashed you into thinking that you are in this world, in this body. And it's, that's the premise of the Matrix, of course, essentially. But that is a possibility, and you don't know whether or not that's happened. You just don't know. And it's okay to admit that. It's okay to admit you don't know. You also don't have to operate on the idea that that's the way that things work and that that's what's going on, because that would be to create an assumption out of a possibility. And that's usually counterproductive. Unless that assumption is really, really good and it's very accurate and correct. But even then, you don't need to make an assumption. Instead, what you can do is you can just say, my sense of things tells me that there's a very high probability that the way things work is that, for example, the universe must have come from another dimension of space, because this is three-dimensional space that was created by the coming into being of the universe. And so you can say that, to me, means that the rational direction, the only rational direction to go in terms of trying to understand how the universe works, is to think that there must be dimensions that unfurl into this dimension. There must be what we would look at as compacted dimensions that are within space itself and then expand into the space that we know. Now, that might be wrong, but it's the kind of idea that you can have a conviction about and follow, because it makes a lot of sense to think that whatever created all this space must have existed on some level that we just don't interact with typically in science or in our day-to-day lives. Well, scientifically, they might be interacting with those dimensions. Science is very weird. I mean, of course, they're the ones who came up with the idea that the whole universe came out of a fractions of a centimeter large point and exploded, and then became the universe that we see. But what kind of a fractions of a centimeter large point could contain all of this in it? Something with a different dimension than what we are aware of. Or something where looking at it that way, as if it exploded out of this single point, is showing us to look at the idea of dimensionality as that everything is connected, essentially. And that to a degree dimensionality is an illusion, and that explosion would be somewhat of an illusion. Not completely an illusion. Obviously, we see the energy from it still here, but it's an illusion in the sense that everything is contiguous. It's in a state of continuation. So we look to the edge of the universe, we see a limit to our universe, but we know that's just the limit of what we can perceive. And so if we live in a universe where it just goes on forever and ever and ever, then that might show us that what would maybe look like compacted dimensions that exploded out into a big bang is actually an interdimensional connectedness between all of these universes that exist together all at once. And so in that sense, how you treat the boundary of the universe might change what you would call the origin of the universe. So those are just thoughts, like just speculations. But what's important about that, relative to the idea of beingness, is that you can say, I know the difference between speculations, thinking about stuff, and being able to make true statements about things. I know the difference between theory and fact. And that is the key to navigating life in a way where your knowledge base builds on something material and real all the time, instead of building on notionality, just ideas of things and emotions and biases that come out of those. So I just wanted to talk about that for a bit. Hope that was interesting. But the last thing I'll say is that the idea of all of this is to be aware of the difference between what you know, so what you know that you know, and what you don't know that you know. And to let yourself be agnostic toward the world so that it can seem very obvious that it's a certain way, and it can be very useful to approach it as if it is that way. But let your mind be open to the idea that if you don't truly know something, there's no point in making a statement about it as if you do know it. Because no matter how rational or logical it seems, such as the idea there's so many ideas that seem rational and logical to us, but they're not necessarily based in fact. They're just based in what we don't know, but what we hold to be true. And there really shouldn't be any place for that in anybody's lives. Because what you don't know and yet hold to be true is an illusion that now exists inside of you. But if that illusion happens to be correct and real, the fact that you act as if you know it generally still is no better than looking at it as something with an extremely high probability and likelihood of being true. And if you look at it as being extremely probable, then you can get all of the benefits of acting on what is real and what is true that you don't know is true, but without the illusion that you would otherwise have to live in to do that, which comes from knowing on some level that you really don't know that that thing is real the way that you think that you do. Although there is one last thing to say for that, which is that even if you don't know that something that you believe you know is real and true, that can connect down to a deeper part of you in your unconscious that does know that that thing is real and true. And that's a piece of thinking that would be considered spiritual, essentially. It's the idea that you know things that you don't know, and that they guide you, and that that's your intuition. And so that's interesting that that hierarchy exists. But the same hierarchy, again, exists with saying, I understand that I don't know, because I don't know what I haven't experienced. I don't know what I'm not experiencing right now. I don't know what I can't say for sure to be true. One of the only things you can really say for sure is that you exist and are having an experience right now. Beyond that, everything is somewhat theoretical. It's just not worth talking about that way. It's more worth talking about things in terms of the consistency of the world, where I can think, the world is gonna be here tomorrow. Like, I don't know that for sure, but it makes sense to act on that idea, on that suspicion, as if that's the only way things are going to go. Anyway, hope that was interesting.